You weren't a soldier anymore, just an old man in a back room with grass-stained boots and nobody to call you sir. That's what the coroner said after checking his pulse, as if the uniform folded at the foot of his cot was just laundry, not legacy. They found him just after dawn, alone in the tiny maintenance room behind Halverston Military Cemetery's main chapel, slumped in his chair with a wool blanket tucked over his legs and a cold thermos of black coffee resting on the desk beside him. The window was cracked open to the sunrise, just like always, and his right hand was loosely clutching a brass keyring with exactly 18 keys, each one labeled with a grave plot. Walter Briggs, 82, hadn't called out sick once in 31 years. He didn't own a car, didn't own a phone, and his paycheck was direct deposited into a savings account that hadn't been touched since Clinton was in office. They assumed he was homeless, a silent nobody who liked keeping grass trimmed and gates locked. Until they opened the locker he'd left behind. That's when the story broke. Inside were three things: a shadow box containing a rusted medallion unlike any known award, a sealed letter with an official Joint Special Operations Command seal, and a photo, aged and yellowing, of a much younger Walter standing in jumbo fatigues, side by side with a man now known as the President of the United States. The groundskeeper, it turned out, wasn't just anyone. He had once been someone they classified so deeply that even his medals were redacted. And when the media asked why he'd spent 3 decades walking perimeter lines and repainting headstone numbers in the rain, the DoD gave no comment, except to send a military police escort to retrieve the contents of his locker. Before we go further, if you believe that real honor doesn't demand attention, it leaves it behind in silence, then like and subscribe. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a veteran's story. It's a reminder that some of our greatest heroes live in quiet, unnoticed corners of the world, right up until the moment history finds them again. For 31 years, Walter Briggs was just Walt the groundskeeper at Halverston. Never missed a shift. Walked the same route each morning at 5:02 a.m. sharp, checked the west gate latch 3 times, tightened the flag halyard manually, even after it had been converted to automatic, then walked the northern fence line muttering names under his breath. The younger cemetery staff never asked what he was saying. They didn't really care. He was background, a gentle relic who shuffled through the day with a limp and a canvas satchel full of tools older than some of the headstones he maintained. Every Friday, he'd leave exactly 6 folded flags on 6 identical marble slabs in Section Delta, none of which bore names. Just unit designations and classified operations. People thought he was eccentric. But one man didn't. Assistant Director Mark Torres, a new hire and former Green Beret with a sharp eye for detail. "You got the stride of a long march evac," Mark once said, watching Walt limp away from the irrigation shed. "Left side won't." Walt didn't reply. But the next day, Mark found a single decommissioned paratrooper patch folded under a stone on his desk. No note. No explanation. Walt had a habit of remembering things no one told him: veterans' birthdays, which families visited graves even after 20 years, which storm drains flooded first in April. He didn't use the digital log system. He kept a worn brown notebook with thousands of entries in tight, cryptic code. The last week before he died, something changed. Walt started repainting the numbers on Section Delta, 18 stones in total, each one freshly cleaned, realigned, and waxed. He stayed late, something he never did. Then, on the final night, security footage caught him placing one last item inside a small time capsule behind the chapel foundation. When they unearthed it the next morning, after finding him cold and still in his chair, they discovered a sealed document titled simply, "The Ones We Lost Twice." Inside were names, full names. The 18 graves weren't blanks. They were operatives listed as key MIA in files buried deep in Cold War archives. One of them was the current Secretary of Defense's uncle. And that's when the cavalry came. A black SUV rolled up before noon. 3 men in suits and 1 colonel stepped out. No press. No camera crew. Just a quiet ceremony conducted in silence at Plot Delta. They left behind new headstones with names, units, commendations. And at the center of it all, a plaque, in honor of Walter Briggs, who walked watch when no one else could. They called him just a groundskeeper. And that was the last mistake anyone ever made about Walter Briggs. They thought it ended when they buried him, that one quiet flag detail and a folded note would be enough to close the book on Walter Briggs. But legacy doesn't stay buried, especially not one written in sealed files and buried coffins. 3 days after his ashes were scattered beneath the willow in Section Delta, a call came in from Arlington. Not a general, not a colonel, a chaplain. "There's movement on the names," he said simply. Your groundskeeper just broke open a ghost file. The next morning, a courier from JSSE arrived carrying a binder marked Topliner 1983. See, inside were black and white aerial photos, decrypted intercept logs, and a single grainy image of Walter, 20 years old, kneeling beside a downed helicopter in a jungle, holding a bleeding teammate with one arm while firing a suppressed rifle with the other. The mission had no name, no country, but the faces in those files matched the stones in Section Delta. What Walter hadn't told anyone, not the nurses, not his staff, not even the few veterans who nodded politely at him on their visits, was that he had led the only confirmed rescue of 18 Allied operatives during Operation Grey Echo, an event still classified under Cold War Joint Command. He walked 19 miles through enemy jungle with a bullet in his hip and 17 pounds of gear on his back, and when extraction never came, he circled the map twice until he found a river no one thought existed, and built a raft with what was left of a torn parachute and 2 bamboo poles. They all made it home, all except the one who bled out in Walter's arms just one click from safety. His name was Private Jesse Knoll, and his body was buried without honors because he'd been declared disavowed. That's the first name Walt had etched into a blank stone in Delta. That's the one he visited most often. Word started spreading quietly at first. A colonel from the Defense Intelligence Agency arrived, unannounced, walked Section Delta for 23 minutes, and left without a word. Then a federal archivist showed up with a portable scanner and took high-res captures of every stone Walt had cleaned and restored. "This isn't protocol," she whispered. "This is tribute." Meanwhile, Mark Torres, the assistant director, couldn't sleep. Every day he dug a little deeper, following Walt's field notes, piecing together the breadcrumbs Walt had left behind in pencil and silence. And what he found changed everything. Walt hadn't just maintained graves, he protected them. Over the years, he'd submitted invisible maintenance requests, coded emails, and signed paper slips to ensure the headstones in Delta were never moved, never reassigned, never cataloged for renovation. When the VA tried to pave new paths through the section in 2008, Walt somehow intercepted the order and had it delayed for soil testing. That testing never happened. But the construction was canceled. The map in Walt's notebook wasn't just for mowing routes, it was a defensive perimeter. He was guarding something. And now, the DoD wanted to know what. On the 6th day after his death, 2 military vehicles parked outside the cemetery at dusk. 4 men stepped out, including a retired Navy SEAL with a satellite phone. Mark met them at the chapel. They handed him a weatherproof briefcase. "You want to watch this alone," they said. He planned for this. Inside the case was a thumb drive. No encryption. Just a single video, titled, "Delta Wasn't Lost." The footage was grainy, but clear enough. A younger Walter, thinner, darker hair, still walking tall, stood at the edge of a river with 5 men behind him, all wounded, exhausted. He spoke directly into the camera. "If you find this, it means I didn't make it. I'm not a hero. I just outlasted the silence. These men behind me? They didn't lose the mission. They fulfilled it. And if they're buried without names, it's because our war was written in pencil. Give them ink." The screen cut out. Mark didn't cry. He just sat in the chapel pew and stared at the flagpole Walt used to fix every morning, realizing it wasn't habit, it was ritual. The next day, news leaked. A low-ranking civilian clerk accidentally mentioned a priority reclassification project involving Halverston's unmarked graves. The leak hit the right ears. A journalist embedded with a Congressional Military Oversight Committee filed a formal inquiry. Then came the request from the White House liaison's office. Is it true the president served under Briggs? The answer? Not exactly. But they had once trained together. Same survival school, same winter rotation, same instructor evaluation report where Walter Briggs had been described as the man you want leading when the radio's gone dead. That quote resurfaced on military Twitter, then on TikTok, and then in the halls of Congress. By week's end, the Department of Veterans Affairs issued an emergency directive. Every unidentified headstone in Section Delta would be reviewed and, where possible, reclassified with full honors. But the final move didn't come from the VA. It came from the Pentagon. At 0500 the following Monday, a Black Hawk helicopter circled over Halverston and touched down on the East Lawn. A lieutenant general emerged, flanked by 6 honor guards and a chaplain, carrying a new headstone and an order signed by the Secretary of Defense. The plaque read, "Walter Briggs, Guardian of the Forgotten, 1942 to 2024. He did not rest so they would not be erased. No cameras, no press, just silence, Exactly how Walt wanted it. But even silence has echoes. And they were just beginning to carry. It should have been a quiet morning. Just another dewy sunrise over Halverston, the flag flapping above Plot C, groundskeepers loading their gear before the visitors trickled in. But the silence today felt different. It wasn't stillness, it was anticipation. People began arriving before the gates even opened. Veterans in wheelchairs with jackets full of pins, officers in crisp dress uniforms, and one woman in civilian clothes carrying a folded newspaper and trembling hands. Her name was Maggie Knoll, and she hadn't stepped on military ground since the day her brother Jesse's body was shipped home in a sealed casket labeled unrecoverable. Now, she stood barefoot in the grass in front of his grave, newly etched, newly honored, all because of a man she never met. By noon, Halverston looked nothing like it had in decades. Four-star generals stood shoulder to shoulder with janitors. Schoolchildren filed quietly past stones they once ignored. And at the chapel doors, a line formed to see the display the Pentagon insisted be installed. Walter's original notebook, opened to the last entry, Delta accounted for. Mission complete. But what none of them saw was what happened at dawn. I was there. I was standing at the northeast fence line when I saw the motorcade stop just outside the service entrance. No escort, no sirens. A single black SUV. When the door opened, a tall man stepped out, dressed not in uniform, but in jeans and a worn gray sweatshirt. His hair was mostly white, his posture bent, but the moment I saw his eyes, I knew. It was President Harrow, 45th Commander-in-Chief, Medal of Honor recipient, former Special Forces. And he was holding a single item in his hand, a folded flag from 1972, one I recognized from a photo Walt had kept locked in that damn shadow box all those years. The president walked without speaking, passed every security checkpoint like they weren't there, and made his way to Section Delta. He stopped at Walter's plaque, knelt, and whispered, "Permission to stand post in your place, sir." No camera caught it. No journalist heard it. But I did. And in that moment, I realized this whole place had misunderstood who Walter Briggs was. He wasn't guarding the dead. He was guarding the memory. The president stood and turned to me. "You the new caretaker?" he asked. I nodded, unsure. "He trained me once," he said softly. "Taught me what to do when orders fail. You know what he used to say?" I shook my head. He said, "Leadership isn't who talks first. It's who's still standing when the shouting stops." He placed the folded flag on Walter's headstone, saluted, then walked back to his vehicle without another word. No ceremony. No applause. Just reverence. That evening, I stayed late. I had to. It didn't feel right leaving the place empty. I walked the perimeter twice, just like Walter used to, checked every latch, trimmed the grass around every newly marked grave in Delta, and stood in silence under the willow. That's when I noticed it. A faint glint near grave 421C. I brushed back the leaves and found a small brass tag nailed into the dirt. It read simply, "For the watch that never ended." I didn't cry. I couldn't. But I felt something move in my chest, something deep, old, and grateful. Walter Briggs never asked for thanks. He didn't need a parade, a eulogy, or a 21-gun salute. What he wanted, what he gave everything for, was simple. For the forgotten to be remembered. For the erased to be rewritten. For the quiet to speak louder than the noise. Today, when visitors come to Halverston, they see more than stones. They see stories. They hear the name Walter Briggs and pause, even if they don't know the whole tale. And they read a plaque beneath the flagpole that says, "Caretaker, Commander, Sentinel." He was always watching. Sometimes, when the wind's just right and the sun hits the willow just so, I swear I hear footsteps on gravel at dawn. I like to believe that's him, still checking the locks, still counting the names. Because some soldiers never clock out. They just make sure someone's still standing post after them. And for the rest of my life, that someone is me.